Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Torpey, and although I regret that I can't be there with you at the Maplewood Memorial Library today to screen Poverty Inc., I wanted to send this short message in to reflect on a couple experiences that I had in relation to what we're talking about today and what Poverty Inc. is about. A few years ago, while I was in office as the mayor in South Orange, I had the opportunity to visit Rwanda and had a really incredible experience attending a community meeting that was being facilitated by an organization called Spark Microgrants. And the community meeting left me with a couple lessons. The biggest one of which was I had attended and seen and attempted to be a part of so many opportunities, so many instances in South Orange, in the surrounding areas, in other places where my work brought me in the U.S., where we were really trying to figure out, what is the best way for us to have an impact on our community. Especially for some of the younger folks that I know who've run for office in different parts of the country, their goal is not necessarily to advance a party interest or to build their career, but it's to try and use the government in some way to have a positive impact for people's lives. But if you're doing a good job at that, one of the things that you're always asking yourself is, are we doing a good job? Are we really helping people who are most in need? And are the solutions that we're helping provide or facilitate the things that the community actually requires, or are they things that we think the community requires? And being self-reflective like that, I always found to be an important part of being in office. But what I found when I was in Rwanda was that simultaneously, there are different people in kind of different parts of the world in different instances trying to answer the question of how do you answer that question? How do you even ask it? How do you know whether what you're doing is the right thing or not? And how involved are community members and in what ways are they involved to help you understand what the impact of the work that you're doing actually is. When my term ended in 2015, one of the things that I had promised myself while I was in office is with my newfound ability to move around and have a little bit more time to kind of travel and explore and see places that I hadn't had the opportunity to do. While in office, I went back to East Africa and I spent some time working with different community development organizations in Rwanda and Uganda. I spent a couple months there and met dozens of different people from different organizations, and really a totally transformative, incredible experience on a couple fronts. But there were a couple lessons from that trip that I thought I would share here today as just brief reflections on some of the conversations that I think you'll all have as part of this event. The first is that a lot of people like to think about, especially in government in the U.S., but really everywhere, think about people use the phrase community engagement all the time. But what does community engagement really mean? You could structure a project, you could structure a process from a government or from an organization providing direct needs. You could structure that process such that the community provides feedback. You could structure the process that the community participates in helping you set your goals. You could structure the project in the community identifying the goals. And you could even structure a project having a community actually implement the project itself. And each of those different things and any others, they each have a particular, kind of set of pros and cons. How involved is the community in actually driving the project? How much ownership do they have over the project? And how much ownership do they have over the success or the failures of the project? And trying to understand that realistically and create projects where you're not just involving community members, they're not just participating, but they're actually responsible for the success of the project, to create that kind of confidence among people in communities to be able to solve problems without needing external assistance is something really important to think about whether you're doing it or not. Are you creating dependence from a person on whether it's a town government here in in New Jersey, or whether it's a rural village in Rwanda or Uganda or anywhere else in any other part of the world? What is the goal that you have for your community members? Are they going to leave this process and be dependent on your organization, outside expertise, outside funding sources? Or are you going to leave them with the skills and the resources and, most importantly, the confidence that they need to be able to do these projects on their own in the future? And seeing different organizations do that in different ways, and seeing firsthand organizations that did a great job in creating and focusing on the ownership aspect and focusing on the community empowerment aspect rather than the development was really interesting to see, and not something that we do well here in our kind of political and civic spaces in the United States. The second thing is I'll share a brief story. It was a rural village in Uganda, sort of in eastern Uganda on the Kenya border, and they had worked with this organization, one of the organizations that I had spent some time staying with when I was there. And this particular community was post-implementation. They had basically already finished implementing the project that they had worked out, and they wanted, and the organization was doing one of their kind of post-implementation checkups. So just kind of see how things are going, and take some of that, data back to their organization so that they can understand whether they're being successful in empowering communities or not. And what this particular community decided was that for them, the most important goal that they had to meet was to increase income for people who lived in the community in a sustainable way, and that they could then use that increase in income to buy health insurance, to do more projects in the community, and to provide for other needs that they were in the best position to identify, not necessarily an outside organization. So the goal became about getting a sustainable income producing project off the ground. And that particular project was a goat rearing project. And so they worked with this organization on developing the plan, who's going to manage it, how they're going to measure it, how they're going to pay for it, all that kind of stuff. The organization provides a one-time grant to allow the purchase of any larger items. In this case, the initial goats that the community was going to use to breed them further, and to also be able to sell the milk to other neighboring communities. They had done this extremely well, and were on track to doubling the number of goats that they had, and they were earning revenue from it already. They're very proud of the project and wanted to show the handful of us that were visiting on this particular day all the different goat pens, one of which was actually giving birth at the moment that we were there. And anyway, we went back to a community meeting afterwards, and having a conversation about how the project went and why things were successful. And one of my questions to the community members was, if you could kind of sum up in one word or one sentence, what made your project here so successful as a lesson for other places in other parts of the world. What advice can I take back to other people, back here in the U.S., anywhere else, about why you did such a good job here. And in a community that where participation among women in the community, had to be kind of managed, was not always equalized. A woman stood up and, without kind of asking or waiting for anybody, just said the word unity and just sat back down to the applause of the other community members. And I was like, that's amazing. Unity is important. And the facilitator had commented how this community in the beginning had deeper divisions that prevented them from working together, and that through the course of working on a project that turned out to be successful, one of the most important values that the community took away was the idea of working together, this idea of unity. Later on, we ended up driving back to the house that we were staying at, and I remember this was last year in the earlier stages of the United States presidential election. And I remember seeing on Facebook, looking online and seeing people arguing with each other from within the same party, different parties, same states, different states. And I said, this is incredible. Here we are in this, rural part of the world that, political and government leaders in the United States wouldn't look to necessarily to find a lesson about how to do something right. And yet one of the simplest values, unity, something that's actually in the name of our country, United States of America, is not a value that we have embedded and institutionalized in a sustainable fashion in the way that we try to solve problems. We're a deeply divided country, and even among ourselves, among demographic groups, we're still very divided, and we haven't figured out a way to really bring everybody together and refocus on the things that are most important to us. And building that unification and building the process so that people can understand their shared goals, their shared needs, and why working on a solution together is important, is a real deficiency that we have. That kind of leads me to my third and final lesson or point that I wanted to just kind of mention here today, and it's understanding the limitations of one's own experience and perspective. You find a lot of organizations and a lot of governments here in the United States, NGOs operating in other parts of the world, who really take for granted that they probably don't have the right answer. To think that in 2016 or now 2017 that we've figured something out and we can't make any more progress on it is kind of crazy, especially in something so amorphous as understanding how to govern, understanding how to provide for people's needs, understanding how to allow them to provide for their own needs. and creating a system that produces that effectively and sustainably over time, the odds that we've got it all figured out are very low. And yet you see in a lot of institutional cultures, in a lot of governments, among many political figures, a real deficit of questioning yourself, questioning your goals, questioning your processes, reflecting on whether you're having the right kind of impact or not, reflecting on whether your values as an organization or the values of a particular project match that of the community. We don't do a good job being critical of ourselves, and there are a lot of reasons why. But it just reminded me, and has been a lesson that I've tried to build into the way that I do my work, and the way that when I teach at Seton Hall or at John Jay, or as I do consulting with other organizations and people, to try and build in better processes to encourage people and help them see the value of being critical of what you're doing, and are you really accomplishing your goals in the way that you want to. And if your goal is to be the most effective and to be the most reflective of a community, that sort of means that you have to be the most reflective of yourself, and not only be critical, but understand how far you can go to find perspective, to find additional value, more lessons, more information, more experiences that you could learn from. I think that there's any number of things that we can learn from the way development organizations work overseas, whether they're larger top-down organizations that might not be doing something right, or maybe a smaller, more community-minded organization that's doing something well. Either of those are great opportunities for lessons. And so one of the final lessons or kind of reflections to share was just, or a discussion topic is, how do we find ways to build in accountability structures for political figures, for governments, for NGOs, for companies, for nonprofits, that allow for them to be reflective, to be critical of themselves, and not see that as somehow being vulnerable or exposing themselves or giving up the potential future of funding. So those were a couple things, a couple lessons out of many that I was lucky enough to be able to see by getting to spend some time in other parts of the world. And getting immersed into not only individual cultures, but development cultures, many of which were incredibly positive, brilliant, really creative structures that were really making a difference. And so I hope this has been helpful to share a couple lessons. It's incredible to see some of these lessons, how we've gotten to even take them, put them in place in South Orange, and seeing people in government in the United States get to a point where they're starting to be a little bit more critical of the way that they're doing things. And hopefully the more that we can talk about those experiences, the more that we can share success stories and failures, the more that we can all learn from each other and do all of this better, which is only going to end up in a better future with better outcomes for all of us. So I wanted to thank you all again for kind of inviting me to submit this short video. I hope these kind of discussion topics and lessons have been helpful, and I wish you the best in this conversation and the work in trying to find ways about how we empower people and how we provide better outcomes here in the U.S. and in other parts of the world. So thanks again, and everybody, and have a good rest of the weekend.